And let's go ahead and talk virology. Joining me now is Dr. Vincent Racaniello, Professor of Microbiology and Immunology at Columbia University. Vincent, you there?
I'm here.
How you doing, sir?
Back, Robert. I'm well here in the Northeast. It's getting warm.
Yeah. That's good to hear. I'm sure you're glad you didn't have to get up in the wee hours to call in this morning.
Oh, that was very nice. Thank you for shifting your hours.
I did it just for you. Well, you got some fascinating stories going on Virology blog. That's virology.ws. And I really want to start with the biggest story right here in the U.S. That's the polio-like virus in California. There's a couple of dozen children in California afflicted with this polio-type virus, but it's not actually polio. So what's going on in California, Vincent?
So since about 2012, there have been maybe 20 kids who have had a condition called acute flaccid paralysis. So that is a kind of paralysis that comes on pretty quickly, and your legs or arms get flaccid. You can't move them. They don't get stiff, which is some other type of paralysis with other causes. And this can be caused by a number of different agents. It could be caused by polio, and the World Health Organization actually uses this acute flaccid paralysis to screen the population for possible cases of polio. But it can also be caused by other viruses, including viruses related to polio. It can be caused by completely different viruses, bacteria, and even non-infectious causes as well. So it has a very wide etiology, as we say. It can be caused by a lot of different things. So just seeing a kid with acute flaccid paralysis doesn't mean that it's caused by an infectious agent. So what has happened in California is they're trying to sort out what's causing this. And a virus related to polio called Enterovirus 68 was recovered from a couple of these kids. And, this virus has been batted around in the headlines as the causative agent. The problem is that these non-polio enteroviruses infect a lot of people in the world. Millions and millions of people every year in the U.S. have infections with these viruses. So just isolating them from the kids doesn't at all mean that they are causing the infection. So at this point, we really don't know what's causing this. In a state such as California, with a lot of people, you'd expect actually there to be quite a few cases of acute flaccid paralysis every year. So this is really nothing out of the ordinary. I'm not sure why it's even received the kind of coverage it has, because, in every state you see these, and most of the time you never know what is the cause. So I think part of the appeal has been polio-like, because,
Sure.
We're almost eradicated of polio, and the idea that it might be back, I guess, is appealing to the headlines, but I don't think that's the case at all.
Well, that's good to know. But I did listen to your podcast, the most recent one about a week ago, This Week in Virology, and one of your guests suggested, and I'm paraphrasing here, that this may cause doctors to start testing more for the Enterovirus 68 and essentially manufacture an outbreak of something that's already been there all along.
Right.
Yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I'm not sure that that'll happen. And these kind of testing would have to be done by a hospital virology lab or a state lab or a clinical lab that knows how to test for the virus. And what they would find is probably a lot of incidents where people have this virus, because it's very common. It's a common respiratory pathogen. It will cause this common cold. It's not really known to cause neurological disease. So I can't see it really being responsible for any sort of acute flaccid paralysis. So you might find it more often, but I don't think that's going to mean anything.
Yeah, and so I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this next question, but you were talking about the media picking this up. And one article I read, this is the title of the article, is Outbreak of Polio-like Disease Statistical Noise or a Looming Threat? Yeah, I mean, so.
I talked to a friend of mine at the CDC, and he said this is what the normal level of acute flaccid paralysis that you would expect. So it's really nothing unusual, and he wasn't sure why it was getting so much attention.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's go ahead and move on from this. By the way, since I did bring it up, This Week in Virology, I would encourage you to check that out, listeners, to check out This Week in Virology podcast. They can be found on virology.ws. And not only are you going to get all kinds of fantastic virology analysis, information, but if you've never heard virologists sitting around making jokes, the humor is just knee-slapping funny. So I encourage you to check it out. Let's move on to another topic.
Okay.
It looks like the connection between the Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome coronavirus, or MERS, in humans and the dromedary camels has been further cemented. What did researchers find, Vincent?
So previously, antibodies to the Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome coronavirus, MERS coronavirus, had been found in camels in a number of Middle Eastern countries. And this was a brand new study carried out by Ian Lipkin and his colleagues, who also happens to be at Columbia University. And they sampled camels all over the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. So they took blood and they took nasal swabs from camels all over the country. And they looked for antibodies to the virus, which is, of course, a sign that the virus has at one time infected the animals. And what they found was a widespread antibody presence in these animals all over the country, in every area that they sampled, and again, all over the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And the seropositivity, in other words, the number of camels with antibodies to the virus, ranged from, overall, it was 74%, 150 positive animals out of 203 that they sampled. And it ranged from 5 to 95%. So it seems quite clear that all over that country, this virus is infecting camels. And so it seems likely that that is the source of the human infections. Now, previously, as I said, a few camels here and there had been found to be positive, and it wasn't clear whether the virus went from people to camels or from camels to people. But now that we see that hundreds of camels all over the country are infected, it seems quite likely that they're the source of the human infections.
So that's pretty much ruled out bats, I take it.
I don't think that bats are a likely direct source of this virus.
Mm-hmm.
The bats have a lot of coronaviruses in them for sure.
Oh, yeah.
We don't know if this particular one is in them. I don't think there's good evidence for that. But there isn't a lot of contact between bats and people in general. It can happen, but I think, we've had over 180 cases so far. I just don't think that those are from bats to people. So the consistent finding in camels, in dromedary camels, of antibodies, and I should say also in this paper they found the viral nucleic acid present in these animals. Mm-hmm. And I did a podcast with Lipkin and his colleague Thomas Briza, and they told me that they have actually isolated virus from nasal secretions of the camels. So I think it's quite clear that it's in camels and it's probably going to people.
Yeah, that was a fascinating study that definitely starts pointing us in the right direction, I believe.
I think if you want to hear more, as you said, go over to my podcast, because we did talk to them, and you can hear us discussing the evidence and what's left to be done. I mean, a really interesting question is how it gets from camels to people, because not every sick person who has been sick with the MERS coronavirus has had contact with camels.
Right. Yeah, and like I said, you can visit Dr. Racaniello's blog at virology.ws, and if you look at the right-hand sidebar, you'll see our podcast, and there's several of them, and This Week in Virology, TWIV, is one of them. Now, something that did make a lot of headlines this week also was a rather large virus found in Siberian permafrost. Obviously, I have no clue what this thing is, so what's going on with that, Vincent?
Oh, this is an amazing study, which was done by a group in Marseille, France, and this is a group that's previously been isolating other giant viruses like Pandorovirus and Mimivirus. And what they did is they took a core sample from Siberia, which was taken in 2000, from 30 meters down below the surface. And it was radiocarbon dated at being about 30,000 years old. and they simply thawed it out in the lab, and they infected some amoeba cells that they're growing in the laboratory, and lo and behold, a virus grew out, which is huge. It's you can see it in the light microscope.
Right.
And they called it Pithovirus sibericum. And this thing is 1.5 microns long. So that is bigger than some bacteria. It's bigger than Pandorovirus, which was thought to be the biggest virus ever isolated. And the neat thing is, it's the oldest virus that infects eukaryotic cells. Those are cells that we all have. That's ever been discovered. 30,000 years old. It's been frozen, and it's still infectious. That's really the amazing part about this.
Now, you say, so at some time, was this a human pathogen? Is that what you're saying?
It's unlikely that this was actually or ever was a human pathogen. It's just a virus that happens to be there, but it's, we don't know what the natural host is. They found that it can grow an amoeba.
Yeah.
So it obviously has an amoeba or eukaryotes, and so this is the oldest virus that can infect eukaryotes, as opposed to, say, viruses that infect bacteria.
Right. Well, that's quite a finding. Let me ask you, since you're up there in New York, what on earth is going on in the United States right now with measles?
Well, there are pockets of people who don't get immunized, and so we have viruses always introduced into them, because in other parts of the world, so especially in the UK, there are lots of people who don't immunize against measles, and the virus is circulating there. It's also in many parts of the world where immunization hasn't been as good as it should be, and that virus makes its way to the U.S., and therefore we have outbreaks. And so, this is a completely preventable disease, so it's unfortunate because it can be lethal in children, as you know.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just, I know there's a lot of measles being transported from the Philippines outbreak, and it's hitting up a lot of areas of the United States and Canada and Australia, and it's just, 14 years ago, we practically had it eradicated in this country.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
a couple of recent cases in Boston, right?
Yeah, Boston. Yeah. So it's just.
there are always going to be people who are not immunized in any country for any virus infection, but when you start getting big numbers, then you're going to have outbreaks like this.
Sure.
And so the best thing people can do is immunize their kids. I know there's a lot of suspicion and fear about vaccines in general, but this one is really safe. And as I said, it is, again, you can prevent measles. There's no reason for any kid to get measles and get very sick and possibly die from it.
Right. All right. Well, let me just do one more thing. I want to go back to Virology blog, and I found this article very interesting because I agreed with it 100%. Back in the 90s, I used to teach medical technology, and you wrote an article about how to give a great lecture. Get rid of the notes. Know your topic inside and out. Is there anything you want to say about that?
Yeah, so I teach a virology course to undergraduate students at Columbia University, and have about 180 students every spring semester. So we're teaching the course right now. And I've never in my career, except for at the very beginning, used notes. I just stand at the front of the room, I walk around, I show slides, and I talk from just off the top of my head, basically.
Right.
And I can look at the audience, and they can look at me, and they see that I'm engaged. And I know a lot of my colleagues use notes, and I've had many complaints from students over the years. He or she, they don't know what they're talking about. They lose their place. They look at their notes, and that doesn't inspire confidence in the students that you're teaching them something that you really know. So if you want to really give a great lecture, there are a lot of things that go into it, but the most important, in my view, is not to have any notes. Have just slides with images on them, and know it well enough to talk from that. If you can't do that, you shouldn't be teaching it.
Well, yeah, when I used to teach, some years ago, I did rely on the PowerPoint presentation, but it was like an outline, just so I.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, just so I can keep my timing and everything together. But other than that, if you don't know it well enough, you shouldn't be teaching it.
No, an outline is perfectly fine.
Yeah.
And then you can go from that, or pictures, images. You show a picture of a virus, you can start explaining what the virus is all about. All that is great, but you need to know it so well that you don't have to refer to anything, because that's, as you know, if you have notes and you get lost, it's hard to find your place in the notes. You're fumbling it around, and then the students are thinking, does this guy really know enough to tell me about this?
Exactly. Well, I encourage anybody out there that's listening, if you're a teacher, I encourage you to check out that article on the Virology blog at virology.ws. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about concerning your blog, Vincent?
Well, I regularly write articles about what's going on in the virus world. I have one ready to go up next week about an interesting story on the infectious influenza vaccine, the flu mist, and some experiments that were done in mice looking at what the vaccine might do to bacteria that colonize your upper respiratory tract. So that'll be next week's article, and I encourage everyone to check it out. We have comment sections. People are welcome to go in and write comments, and if I have my time, I go in and answer them. So we're trying to make it a place to go to find out what you need to know about viruses.
Do you write anywhere else?
I do not write anywhere else. This is my main output. Over the years, I've had a few articles here and there, but this is where it is.
Okay, well, there we go. Virology blog, virology.ws. Dr. Vincent Racaniello, Columbia University. Thank you, sir, and I'll be in touch.
Robert, thanks for having me, and have a great day.
You too, sir. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.